Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2025 library tour. In this episode, the finale of classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. Let's get started with Shakespeare. This is the complete works of William Shakespeare. I've had this book for a little more than 20 years now. I picked it up for a class when I was at St. Edward's University. I took a class on Shakespeare and we read, I think, 2 or 3 plays in the 4 play categories. So history, comedy, tragedy, romance, as well as the sonnets. And I've never really been all that big a fan of Shakespeare. I know he's been told to me that he's the greatest poet, greatest playwright in the English language, but I've never really seen it for myself. His work has never really connected to me on that level. And one of the things I have to think about whenever my mind goes to purging this part of my collection is, what should I do with Shakespeare? I don't read this book. The only time I really handle this book is if I'm rearranging my shelves or I'm doing a tour video. I don't read this. There is a BookTube event every year called Shaktember or Shaketube, whatever the hell it is. But I really have no interest in reading Shakespeare, so should I still keep him in my collection because he's Shakespeare, or when the time comes, should I seriously consider just getting rid of this, and if I have a desire to read Shakespeare, then just recollect him some way, shape, or form later? I don't know. But for the moment, this part of my collection is rather safe because I only have a bookcase and not quite a half a bookcase. So right now, this part of my collection is rather safe. It's more this year science fiction and fantasy, which I've already gone through, and history, which I'll be going into later this week. That's more concern, or I have a lot more of. Next up is poetry. The Mummy Eaters by Sherry Shinoda. This was longlisted for the National Book Award about 2 years ago in poetry, and it's an okay collection, though not one that I particularly enjoyed. The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 1995. So this is a novel set in part in Canada and in part in the United States. It's about a woman's life. I tried to read it, was it last year or the year before? I don't remember when I tried to read this, but I really did not like it. I lasted maybe 2 or 3 chapters before I wanted to walk away, and I did. So I really did not like this. The next 4 books are by Evie Shockley. I think this is all of her work to date. I mean, she might have a chapbook that I'm unaware of or have forgotten about. First up is A Half-Read Sea, which is fairly good. My favorite collection of hers, though, is her second collection, The New Black. This is the first collection of hers that I've I picked up, and I've read it several times, and I quite like it. It is really good. Her third collection is Semi-Automatic, which is also quite good. In her most recent collection is Suddenly We, which was shortlisted for the National Book Award not this past year, but the year before, I think. I'm getting things a bit confused right now, but this is a really good collection too. I need to reread it though. Next is Tomb of Sen by Gitanjali Sri, translated by Daisy Rockwell. It won the International Booker going on 3 years ago. It's about a family around the time of Indian independence and the separation of India and Pakistan. It's been a while since I had a go at it, and neither time was all that successful. I'm really thinking about giving it another go. Maybe. Picked it up from Book Depository. The next two books are by Austin Smith, one of my favorite contemporary poets. This is his first collection, Almanac. Both of his collections are part of the Princeton series of contemporary poets from Princeton University Press. Really love this collection. And also really love his second collection, Flyover Country. Really, really love this collection. This is the first of the two that I picked up, although this is the more recent. I'm really looking forward to more work by Austin Smith. Hopefully that comes sooner rather than later. Next is Trippus by Brandon Sum. This won the Pulitzer Prize last year for poetry, I think. Yeah, winner of the 2024 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry and a finalist for the 2023 National Book Award for Poetry. I rather liked it, although the collection didn't necessarily blow me away. Back to the Elizabethans with The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. This is a massive poem about a reimagining of King Arthur's court. It's about a number of knights who are sort of representative of certain concepts and how they go on allegorical adventures. I read the first book back in college and wanted the complete Fairy Queen, and never got around to reading it until about 2 or 3 years ago when I embarked on a rather insane March of the Mammoths project, which ended up failing because not a one of them actually worked for me. So I'm not entirely sure what to do with the Fairy Queen. Next is a collection of short fiction, Glossary for the End of Days by Ian Stencil. It's out from Acre, which is affiliated with the University of Cincinnati Press, and is distributed by the University of Chicago Press. 2 years ago, maybe 3, in one of the cell catalogs, not the big one, but one of the subject specific or area specific. This collection was included, and I picked it up. And not too fond of it. I don't know if I'm going to have another go at it or not, but my first attempt to read it was not successful. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. This is one of the great American novels. It is set during the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, and it's about the Joad family, who are farmers living in Oklahoma who lose their land due to the Dust Bowl and migrate to California to eke a living working as migrant farmers. I read this novel. I had a mass market paperback in the 2000s. I don't remember if I read it in high school, or I tried it in high school, didn't work, then I actually managed to read it in college. But I had a rereading attempt of this novel last year, and it did not quite work out. Which, again, is lately par for the course for me. Limited Editions by Carol Stone. This is a poetry collection that looks at sort of coming to accept death and mortality. I think in this case it's the speaker's husband who's dying. This is from Kevin Carey Press, which is distributed by the University of Chicago Press. Suetonius' Lives of the Caesars, translated by Catherine Edwards. Picked this up several years ago from Golden's Book Exchange in Waco and have not gotten around to it. Back to poetry with two books by Fiona C. Lorraine and then Wisława Szymborska. This is The Ruined Elegance. Lorraine's first collection of poetry. It's from the Princeton series of contemporary poets from Princeton University Press. I definitely have a taste for the contemporary poet series from Princeton. Rather like this collection, although I prefer the second book more, which is Rain in Plural. I have 3 books by Wisława Szymborska. Sounds, Feelings, and Thoughts, 70 Poems by Wisława Szymborska, translated by Magnus J. Krinsky and Robert A. McGuire. This is part of the Lockhart Library of Poetry and Translation and published by Princeton University Press. I think this is a reissue of an earlier version. I think this is probably her Szymborska's first collection in English, or selected collection in English. Although updated at least by 1996, because that's when she won the Nobel Prize in Literature. I have a more recent selection of Szymborska's work. A View with a Grain of Sand, which is the first collection of hers that I ever owned. I've had this for 20 or more years. It is translated by Stanislaw Baranchak, and Claire Kavanagh. And includes poems from 1957 to 1993. I also have Map, Collected and Last Poems, which is again published by Claire Kavanagh and Stanislaw Baranchak. And this includes, I think, all of her work, if I'm not mistaken, but also moves up from 1993 to 2002, to 2011. Of the three collections, I gravitate toward to View with a Grain of Sand. That is my favorite collection of hers. Although I do really need to reread this. This is Kiss for the Absolute by Shuzo Takaguchi, translated from the Japanese by Mary Jo Bang and Yuki Tanaka, who has a poetry collection coming out in April. Or March. Yeah, I think his work is coming out in April. This is part of the Lockhart Library of Poetry and Translation from Princeton University Press. Takaguchi was a surrealist Japanese poet whose work I don't particularly like. I'm also not terribly fond of The Poetess Counts to 100 and Bows Out by Ana Enriqueta Terán, translated by Marcel Smith. This is also part of the Lockhart Library of Poetry and Translation from Princeton University Press. Native Guard by Natasha Trethewey, winner of the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. It's been a bit since I read this. I picked this up sometime last year and read it, probably in the summer, and don't really recall much from it. I need to reread this. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. This is a novel about a con man who basically worms his way into British high society, although not quite the highest of British high society. And there's a lot of romantic shenanigans going on, and that sort of thing. I bought this a few years ago for Victober and attempted to read it for Victober and failed. Within, I think, a chapter. The first chapter really put me off. And I've often talked about, I'm not really all that fond of the Victorians, and I don't really have much of a selection when it comes to Victorian literature in my collection. And sometimes I wonder if I should try to make a go of Victober one year. but I never get around to trying to add more Victorian literature to my collection. It just never screams that I need to order or buy more Victorian literature. The Arthurian Romances of Chrétien de Troyes. I picked this up about more than 10 years ago because I had a hankering for Arthurian romances, although I never got around to reading it. Next is a work of Australian literature, Loaded. This is the story of a young man who's just coming to understanding that he's gay, who goes on a day-long bender, effectively. I tried to read it 1 year for Aussie April, I think. I might have tried to read it for something else, and didn't quite get on with it. Not entirely sure if I'm going to give it a re-go or not. Sibilance by Sally Van Doren. This is from LSU Press. Picked this up at the end of 2023 and rather liked it when I read it. "20,000 Leagues Under the Sea" by Jules Verne. This is part of the Great Illustrated Classics series and was a discarded book from the Rico McLennan County Library System, which I picked up for 50 cents. Many years ago. Have not gotten around to reading it yet. The Aeneid, translated by Virgil, translated by Robert Fitzgerald. I originally had a copy of this book for a class on Greek mythology, which is why I have the two Pagel's translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I got rid of that copy because it was a trade paperback, and eventually I decided to pick it up, and so I picked up this a bit more battered hardcover from Golden's Book Exchange, although I've never gotten around to rereading it. Sticking with Homeric fan fiction, this is Omeros by Derek Walcott. Derek Walcott was a poet from St. Lucia whose magnum opus is Omeros, which is in part a modernized retelling of the Trojan War as it relates mostly to the relationships of Helen. Although, unlike in the actual Trojan War, in this case, Helen's paramours are not Menelaus and Paris, but Achille and Hector, who in part fight over her, although I think neither one of them particularly like each other. There's also Derek Walcott himself making appearances. There's a whole lot of other stories. So it's been a while since I've read this. I first read this for a class going on 20 years now, and I liked it at the time, although my reread of it a few years ago left me a bit confused. So maybe I'm due for a reread. Although hopefully it will go better than a lot of my recent reread attempts have. Next is Sterling Carat Gold by Isabel Weidner. This is a very weird novel that I don't quite understand what it's about. It was up for a book prize a few years ago, and I, for some reason or other, gravitated towards that prize that year and picked this up from Book Depository, although by the time I finally got around to reading it, I didn't particularly care for it. The End of Everything by Matt Wall. This is a poetry collection by a YouTuber, Matt Wall. He sent it to me a few years ago, and I read it, and it's an okay collection. It's okay. Matt's style of poetry, it's rather reminiscent of, like, say, Catherine Doughty. I mean, obviously he's very inspired by Bukowski, but it's a bit more visceral than I usually go for. Further News of Defeat by Michael X. Wang. This won the Autumn House Fiction Prize, and it's published by Autumn House Press and distributed by the University of Chicago Press, which is where I picked it up, alongside Stories for the End of Days. No, Glossary for the End of Days. Much like Glossary for the End of Days, did not particularly care for this book either. You Bury the Birds in My Pelvis by Kelly Weber. This is a collection published by Omnidon, which is distributed by University of Chicago Press, and I quite liked it. I remember it quite fondly. The Duchess of Malfi and Other Plays by John Webster. I picked this up about 20 years ago because I had a class in Renaissance literature that wasn't just Shakespeare, and read The Duchess of Malfi and I think The White Devil were the two that we read. Have never gotten rid of this one though. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I picked this up a few years ago. I'm not entirely sure why. It's about a young man who who's effectively engaged to be married, but he falls in love with someone else. But eventually that relationship goes nowhere, thanks in no small part to the connivance of his original intended. I did not get on with this book. Nest of Matches by Amy Whitmore. This is a collection from Autumn House Press, of course distributed by the University of Chicago Press. Quite like this collection. I picked it up sometime in last year from University of Chicago Press. They had a poetry sale, and this was one of the books I picked up for that. Or it might have been a different sale that included some poetry. Because what the University of Chicago Press does is that they have this big multi-month sale at the beginning of the year. They also release area catalogs throughout the year. Um, and then they will also have email sales as well. The Picture of Dorian Gray and Other Writings by Oscar Wilde. I've had this for a number of years. I wish I still had the trade paperback of The Picture of Dorian Gray because I really like that cover. So I've tried The Picture of Dorian Gray, never got into it. Let's see, where's the table of contents? I've read Salome, not impressed, and I've tried The Importance of Being Earnest and did not get on with that one either. Next is 3 plays by Thornton Wilder, including Our Town, which I've read several times and is a play that I really adore. The Skin of Our Teeth and The Matchmaker, neither of which I have read. And I largely picked this up because I wanted to read Our Town, and so quite happy to have picked it up. Although I wish I had a better copy. But it was like 99 cents, So sticking with drama, I have some plays by Tennessee Williams. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. This is a play set in the American South, mid-century. It's about a family jockeying for inheritance as the family patriarch is seemingly diagnosed with an incurable case, like a terminal cancer. And so he has a favorite of his 2 sons. Unfortunately, that son is a hot mess and is really not qualified to handle the inheritance he's going to get. Somehow or other, grandchildren are involved, even though the patriarch, Big Daddy, does not care all that much for his grandchildren from the other son. So I read it, I picked this up a few months ago, well, probably going on about a year ago now, and reread it, and I don't like the play as much as I remember having liked it, which is something that my rereads lately outside of manga have been giving me. I also have The Glass Menagerie, which I read in high school as an assigned reading. It's about a family teetering on the edge and ultimately shattering at the end. Have not gotten around to rereading it. I also have The Night of the Iguana, which is set in rural Mexico and is about a not quite defrocked priest having gone into the tour guide business, who's nearly at the end of his rope with that too, going to a hotel run by his friends, trying to run from his problems. I first read this play back in the 2004-2005 and remember it quite fondly, but coming back to it in 2024, I'm not as fond of it. Selected poems by William Carlos Williams. I first encountered William Carlos Williams in a class. I read this collection, although not this exact copy. I got rid of the copy I had and eventually reacquired it because I'd always been kicking myself that I got rid of my original copy. Even though having reread it 2 or 3 years ago, it's not as impressive as I remember it. Now, Before Our Eyes, New and Selected Poems, 1975 to 2017 by Eleanor Wilner. This is from the Princeton series of contemporary poets from Princeton University Press. I read this 2 or 3 years ago. This was one of the first ones I picked up from Princeton University Press. So, Princeton will have, over the course of, at least usually they'll have one in the early part of the year. They will have a 2-week 75% off sale. And they will select a number of books, thousands of books, I think. And some of those will be part of the Princeton series of contemporary poets and the Library of Translation, although it'll mostly be other things as well. And so that's where I picked up a lot of the Princeton series of contemporary poets. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom by August Wilson. This is a play about the radio business in the early 20th century. I picked this up early last year because I was having a strong desire to add more drama to my collection. Initially it was mid-century American drama, but I kind of fudged things a little bit earlier and a little bit later. And this is part later. Cloud Street by Tim Winton. I picked this up several years ago as part of an attempt to do an Aussie April, and it took me till about last year to actually get around to it. And when I read of it, it's okay, but I lost interest. I might come back around and have another go at it at some point. We shall see. "11" by Mikhail Witkowski, translated by W. Martin. This is from Siegel, which is distributed by the University of Chicago Press. This is a novel set in the early 1990s as the Cold War is wrapping up and is about 2 prostitutes. One, in the novel, I don't quite remember, because I think for all intents and purposes, one of the two is a trans woman who's, I think she's more focused on, and then the other one is a more masculine male prostitute who is memorable for the size of his endowment. And it's basically rather episodic story of them encountering each other at various points in various cities like Vienna, Berlin, Zurich. It's been a while since I read this, and I don't recall much of it because it's been quite a while. I ordered it in 2021. So, probably due for a reread at some point to kind of settle my thoughts on it. Next, Beach Light by Cyril Wong, which is also Seagull. This is a collection of poems dealing with the speaker's homosexuality. Stem by Stella Wong. This is part of the Princeton series of contemporary poets. And this is one of the two from this most recent last year. Did not particularly get on with either one of these. I think I liked this one the least of the two. Which we will get to once I finish off Mark Wunderlich. I have all of his work, starting with The Anchorage. This is a very, very rough first collection. There are some pretty good poems in here, but this is very much Wunderlich learning his craft. My personal favorite collection of Wunderlich's is Voluntary Servitude, which I originally had back in the early 2000s and would read and reread rather frequently, as I do now. But I got rid of it for some dumb reason and proceeded to, over the years, kick myself for it. I reacquired it a number of years ago and quite happy to have it back in my collection. And to have also picked up the rest of Wunderlich's oeuvre. His third collection is The Earth Avails, which I remember, I think I liked this one. I don't remember if this one or the God of Nothingness, his most recent collection, that I had some issues with. Probably need to do a big old reread of Wunderlich sometime this year. Even though I think I did a big old reread of him last year too. Next up is I Was Working by Ariel Yellen. This is the other most recent entry in the Princeton series of contemporary poets from Princeton University Press. Wasn't all that impressed by this collection though. Waiting to see what this year's entries are going to be. And finally, Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu won the National Book Award for Fiction in 2020. And I picked it up, I think on the novelty that a science fiction writer, which Charles Yu is or had been largely. My short story collection of his appeared in my the science fiction side of this tour. This is a very weird novel in which basically the idea, I think, is that on the one hand, life is an act. Like living is an act. And so, on the one hand, the main character is both literally an actor in a sort of a murder detective series, but at the same time, I think life itself is a bit of a performance. I've tried this novel twice, never making it all that far. So that concludes fiction, poetry, and drama. I'm going to take a few days off from the library tour, certainly tomorrow and Wednesday, possibly Thursday as well. We'll see. I want to do some tag videos and some other videos. Also, tomorrow we'll likely have at least one or two book hauls. I have a small pile of last week or so, while I've been doing this part of the library tour. And also should be getting in at least one order, like Thingamanga, because I put in an order a few weeks ago with PALS, and that order should be getting to me sometime this week. And if I'm really lucky, I might get another one from Book People, featuring my January manga pre-orders and also some other manga that I ordered. But I will report back when they come in. But what I really want to do for most of this work week is to do some tag videos, because I've not been doing many tag videos because these videos have gone on long, especially this one. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, and I will see you tomorrow with some new videos. Until then, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe and stay warm.